Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Whatever is impermanent we must let go of. Sooner or later. Including those things that we think belong to us, such as the 5 aggregates: Namarupa, mentality, materiality, or name and form; Vedana, the feelings, whether bad, good, or neutral; Sanya, our notions, assumptions, memories, perceptions; Sankharas, those things that we like to conjure up, that function, that factory of constant thought making, weaving, building castles in the sky; and Vijnana, consciousness or sense awareness. The sense of becoming unburdened, let go of, can be greatly supported by the understanding of the transitory nature of these things, of life, of how our thoughts and concepts, our feelings, constantly change. The Buddha and his Arahant disciples encourage us to constantly let go of anything and everything that is impermanent, emptying the heart from all the rubbish, all the stuff, including concepts, relationships, which invariably the mind attaches to actual things around us, be it a position, be it a role in life, a status, actual people, in a way to extend the quote-unquote legitimacy of being a self. Meanwhile, it's all, the whole thing is a ruse. The whole thing is just delusion. It's like writing in air in the sky, with an ink of some sort, or drawing or painting on air. Usually we've seen in the suttas. There is the mind that knows. What is called the chitta, or the heart. Sometimes it's the same thing. And there are things that are to be known. They cannot know. Form cannot know. Vedana cannot know. Or feelings cannot know. The different experiences we're having cannot know. These are things to be known. Hence we practice sati with panya, wisdom, discernment. And that's where understanding comes. Now with these two, sati and panya, if we maintain these with diligent effort, it's not going to come around with laziness. None of the arahants became arahants with laziness. Laziness and the Dhamma don't go hand in hand. But with sati, consistent sati, panya, with confidence and faith in the practice, in the teachings, as manifested in one's life, diligent effort, there's no way that the triple gem could ever leave the heart. You always have the Dhamma, you always have the Buddha, you always have the Sangha in your heart. And that's why the Dhamma can only be found in the heart. Awakening can only be found in the heart. True purity can only happen in the heart. Not in some ink and paper, in some printed sutta. But it requires effort. It requires diligent effort. Until the sati becomes mahasati, which is great mindfulness. Until panya becomes mahapanya, great wisdom and discernment. Great because it stays with you. And as it stays with you, it goes deeper. We see the fine nuances of things that we thought we knew, we understood, but all of a sudden we understand those things still, obviously, but it is multidimensional. There's a depth to it. Suddenly things are seen for the very first time. And that is a distinguishing factor, a characteristic of a noble disciple who has seen correctly with the eye of Dhamma. So long as they practice sati and panya, it's always fresh. Always, always, always fresh. Fresh experience, fresh understanding. Jnana dasana yatha bhutang pajanati, the suttas say. Or jnana dasana, yatha bhutang jnana dasana. To see, to understand how things are taking place. Not just in the outside world, but especially in the mind, in the heart. We become mindful of what is taking place. How I'm leaning into a feeling while pulling back from another. How I'm dwelling on a certain feeling, mental feeling, if you will, a perception, an experience from the past, a memory. And how the awareness all of a sudden just checks out and it starts circling. The habitual patterns come in and we're circling the drain thanks to more and more of these memories coming in and stealing us from the living experience that is taking place. But a aware mind, a mindful, conscious, diligently engaged effort to know captures this, sees things for what they are. Yatha bhutang jnana dassana. And then suddenly you start seeing anicca, dukkha, anatta because of our adherence to our glue-like touch. In fact, it's more than a touch. It's grabbing and holding and pressing it into our chest. A memory. No, I don't want to let go of this, good or bad. And we dwell on it, dwell on it, dwell on it. And that is what we keep in the heart, not the Dhamma. Many times we talk about the Dhamma, we say we practice the Dhamma, we can even by heart know several suttas or attend Dhamma talks left and right, but it's just a smear, just a layer that gets blown off like dust the moment an intense emotional trigger takes place. And whatever's in the heart, that's what's going to come out. That's why the Arahants have always said, look into the heart for the Dhamma, nowhere else. The kileshas are there. The defilements are there. They're not in someone else. They're never in someone else. Nibbana can only take place in one's own heart, nowhere else. So I wanted to share those thoughts and words of encouragement with you on this day where I believe it's the 4th week of Sutta exploration, if I'm not mistaken. And the sutta that we'll be delving into is one of my favorites. It's Khemaka Sutta with the elder Khemaka. He was a bhikkhu. And this sutta comes from the Samyutta Nikāya, or the linked or connected discourses of Lord Buddha that is found in the Pali Nikāyas. It's a very voluminous text, the Samyutta Nikāya, that is. And you have different discourses, different suttantas, different discourses listed in different bundles and then linked up together. It's somewhat difficult sometimes to follow the order, but with practice one gets the hang of it, as they say. So the bigger collection is called the Salāyatanavagga Samyutta, collection on the 6th sense basis. And then there's a subgrouping. There's many subgroupings, by the way, versus, let's say, in the Digha Nikāya, which is the long discourses. So, because you're dealing with a lot more suttas in the thousands. So the Anguttara Nikāya numerical discourses and the Khuddaka Nikāya, the Samyutta Nikāya, they're almost like in a competition, in my head at least, as far as their numbers go. They're vast numbers, especially as I've been engaged in retranslating many of these suttas. So it comes from a subgrouping of Khanda Samyutta on the aggregates, and then the sub-section would be the Thera Vagga. Theras are the elders, elder bhikkhus. So the section on the elder bhikkhus, Thera Vagga, or the senior bhikkhus. And within this group, we find a sutta dedicated to Ananda, for example. We have for Tissa, we have for Assaji, a different Assaji, not the one that Venerable Sariputta met and was able to attain Sotapanna thanks to his teaching, a different Assaji. We also have, for example, Channa, the one who used to be the charioteer of Prince Siddhartha, and how he was finally, after the Buddha's death, he was shocked as to the instruction given to the Sangha to treat him, to discipline him after Lord Buddha's death, because he had never listened to any of the advice that was given to him by Lord Buddha while he was alive. So you have similar suttas. These are all the elders, and some of the elders that are listed there, of course. And then you have Khemaka Sutta. Khemaka was a bhikkhu. He also was an elder. But the sutta situates us at a time period when Khemaka, Venerable Khemaka, is living on his own, or just with a few bhikkhus, in a place that is about 1 yojana from Kosambi, where you have another group of bhikkhus, elders, staying, a much bigger group, like over 60. So he's living in the forest, in a place called Jujubi forest, Jujubi tree forest. So he's apparently known by the other bhikkhus that he has been advanced in his practice, and he also gives good Dhamma talks. Apparently, we can see the context, especially when you look at the commentaries on this sutta. And it happens at a time period when Venerable Khemaka is gravely ill. He's struggling with health issues. Now, the elder bhikkhus living in Kosambi, which is about 1 yojana. A yojana, by the way, it's a length of distance that we find in not only in the Buddhist tradition, but we also find it in the Vedic tradition, in the Jain tradition. Even, I believe, even today, some texts still refer to yojanas. There's different numbers given, but the consensus is around 7 miles. 1 yojana equaling 7 miles. The Jains, I believe it's 7.5. In the Vedic, it's even like 10 miles or something. So, but in the Buddhist tradition, we usually refer to them in modern age, 1 yojana being about 7 miles. So it was about 7 miles from where the other bhikkhus were living, where Venerable Khemaka was situated in his kuti, in his hut, in the forest. So let us begin. Khemaka Sutta. At one time, a large number of elder bhikkhus were living in Gohosita's forest monastery in Kosambi. It was during that time that the Venerable Khemaka, while residing in the Jujubi monastery, was stricken with a severe illness, as he experienced much bodily pain and suffering. Then, when it was evening, those elder bhikkhus, by coming out from their seclusion, addressed the Venerable Dasaka. Friend Dasaka, go and approach the Venerable Khemaka and inform him. Friend Khemaka, the elder bhikkhus like to inquire about your health as they pass on to you this message. Friend, we hope that you are bearing up. We hope that you are getting better. We hope that your illness is becoming less severe, and your bodily pains and feelings of suffering are decreasing and not increasing. That their subsiding is what is evident, not their continued increase. When you hit a certain age, you become extremely cognizant as we start losing people, contemporaries of ours, friends, family, relatives. And in this case, the Sangha, the bhikkhus, that's all they have. The Buddha in different places says, we must take care of each other, bhikkhus, because we have left mother and father, friends and relatives. You are each other's mothers and fathers. So that's what we're surrounded by, kalyana mittas, ideally. And so they were, it sounds like they were genuinely concerned, because they're coming out of their evening, from their seclusion in the evening. So when we hear that, usually, in the case of bhikkhus, it's the fact that they've, obviously in the morning, they've gone to their alms rounds, and then they carry the food back, usually to a solitary place or to the sala, to where in the monastery, and they eat it there in time, as long as it's not past a certain time. And afterwards, they engage usually with walking meditation and sitting meditation. But rarely have you come across bhikkhus who are really diligent in their practice to just go and lie down and sleep, and just sleep off the food coma, as it were. So anyhow, they had been sitting for hours, and they come out from that seclusion, and apparently they collectively start talking about Venerable Khemaka and how he's doing. So Dasaka is here being asked, Venerable Dasaka, to go and deliver this message to Venerable Khemaka. Yes, friends, replied the Venerable Dasaka in agreement, as he went to the Venerable Khemaka at the Jujubee monastery. Something to be said about Venerable Dasaka. Venerable Dasaka, before becoming a bhikkhu, he actually, the commentaries say that he was a serf. He was basically like a slave in the household of the rich Anathapindika, who we owe so many suttas to, because of also the fact that he bought and donated the Anathapindika Park in Jeta's Grove in Savatthi, that monastery where the Buddha spent over 20 vassas, reigns, 20 years plus. So Dasaka, before becoming a bhikkhu, used to be a slave, a servant of Anathapindika, the householder. So apparently what had happened was, because of him, Anathapindika, going back and forth so much to the monastery in Savatthi, because he liked to spend a lot of time at the feet of the great teacher. So Dasaka showed very much of an interest in being there in the monastery, even to the point where he was helping out the bhikkhus with their, maybe even errands, taking care of them, sweeping the ground sometimes. So apparently it made an impact on Anathapindika, where he just in finding out his interests in becoming a bhikkhu one day, he just set him free. in that sense. He allowed him his freedom. And Dasaka, lo and behold, goes and becomes a bhikkhu in time. And so he's traveling at this point. They're no longer in Savatthi, they're in Kosambi. So he is with these bhikkhus. So that's who Venerable Dasaka briefly stated is. So, yes, friends, replied the Venerable Dasaka in agreement as he went to the Venerable Khemaka at the Jujubee monastery. And having reached his hut, he approached the Venerable Khemaka and relayed the message by saying, "Friend Khemaka, the elder bhikkhus like to inquire about your health as they pass on to you this message. Friend, we hope that you are bearing up. We hope that you are getting better. We hope that your illness is becoming less severe, and your bodily pains and feelings of suffering are decreasing and not increasing. That their subsiding is what is evident, not their continued increase." In reply, the Venerable Khemaka stated, "Friends, I am not bearing up well. I am not getting better. My illness is getting severe, and my bodily pains and feelings of suffering are increasing and not decreasing." Pretty self-explanatory, right? And he's just matter of fact in his response. Then, having received his reply, the Venerable Dasaka went back to the elder bhikkhus and informed them, "Friends, the Venerable Khemaka sends you the following response. Friend, I am not bearing up well. I am not getting better. My illness is getting severe, and my bodily pains and feelings of suffering are increasing and not decreasing." Then those bhikkhus asked the Venerable Dasaka to go back to the Venerable Khemaka and tell him, "The elder monks say this, Friend, the Blessed One has taught us about the 5 aggregates of clinging that are comprised of clinging to the aggregate of form, clinging to the aggregate of feelings, clinging to the aggregate of notions or memories, clinging to the aggregate of mental constructions, and clinging to the aggregate of consciousness or sense awareness. Therefore, the elder bhikkhus asked the Venerable Khemaka as to which of these 5 does he reflect and look upon as his self, or the parts that make up or belonging to his self." So you see here how, in a way, they're kind of fishing for Dhamma, for a teaching, because apparently Venerable Khemaka used to come and teach them and then go back to his hut. So yes, they're concerned. I would hope that they're genuinely concerned. The way the sutta unfolds, we see that they've been very genuine in their concern. However, you can see here the conversation is suddenly going from mundane things to the Dhamma. So, which part of these 5 aggregates is Venerable Khemaka talking about when he says, "I am not bearing up well. In fact, I'm in pain and suffering"? So who's this who's suffering? And we continue. And the Venerable Dasaka, having consented to go back, he set off and reached the Venerable Khemaka's hut, as he relayed the message given to him by saying, "Friend, the Blessed One has taught us about the 5 aggregates of clinging that are comprised of clinging to the aggregate of form, clinging to the aggregate of feelings, clinging to the aggregate of notions, memories." These are the same thing as perceptions. Usually in English translations of this Dhamma, we see perceptions for sanya, but this is sanya. You can alternate it with perception, it doesn't matter. Clinging to the aggregate of mental constructions and clinging to the aggregate of consciousness or sense awareness. Therefore, the elder bhikkhus asked the Venerable Khemaka as to which of these 5 does he reflect and look upon as his self, or the parts that make up or belonging to his self. To this, the Venerable Khemaka replied by saying, "Friends, the Blessed One has indeed taught us about the 5 aggregates of clinging that are comprised of clinging to the aggregate of form, clinging to the aggregate of feelings, clinging to the aggregate of notions or memories, clinging to the aggregate of mental constructions, and clinging to the aggregate of consciousness or sense awareness. However, I do not reflect nor look upon any of these as myself, nor see them as parts or things that make up or belonging to a self in me." Here he is drawing a very clear distinction, because the elders, when they heard that he's not doing well, I'm in pain, etc., they immediately concluded, it sounds like, that, oh, then the Venerable Khemaka is just still a putujjana in a sense. He's still unable to see the difference between the aggregates. He's not disconnected from this sense of clinging to the 5 aggregates that make up a person, a self. So he's acknowledging the presence of these aggregates, but he's making a very direct statement here. I do not reflect nor look upon these as myself, nor see them as parts or belonging to a self, which means that Venerable Khemaka is at the very least a Sotapanna, because he does not have that rigid sense of self, my, I am, this is me, this is who I am, which in Pali it's called Sakkaya Ditthi, the wrong view of the of a selfhood, an independent entity made up of these 5 aggregates. And having received his reply, the Venerable Dasaka went back to the elder bhikkhus carrying the message. Friends, the Venerable Khemaka says, the Blessed One has indeed taught us about the 5 aggregates of clinging that are comprised of clinging to the aggregate of form. And you're going to notice there's a lot of repeat. Many translation versions of it, they skip all these, but I make a point of repeating them because that's how the Buddha passed it on. And so we need to keep that in the way I understand it. Clinging to the aggregate of form, clinging to the aggregate of feelings, clinging to the aggregate of notions or memories, clinging to the aggregate of mental constructions, and clinging to the aggregate of consciousness or sense awareness. However, I do not reflect nor look upon any of these as myself, nor see them as parts or making up or belonging to a self in me. Now here, the elder bhikkhus, in hearing this, again asked the Venerable Dasaka to go back and ask the Venerable Khemaka the following give him the following message. Now, it's kind of funny to consider the distance to be traveled. Each way, it's about 7 miles. So Venerable Dasaka is going 7 miles, hopefully getting some rest, and he's going off of a single meal a day. The poor guy has to go back and forth, and the sutta presents it in a way where it's like all of these going back and forth, like a go-between, is done in the same day, which I have a tough time wrapping my mind around, because that's 14 miles each time a question's being asked. So, and it's not like paved road, or it's rough, even in those days. So you're going through the forest at least a big portion of the trip. So let's bear that in mind. So they asked the Venerable Khemaka, who Yes, so friend, the Blessed One has taught us about the 5 aggregates of clinging that are comprised of clinging to the aggregate of form, clinging to the aggregate of feelings, clinging to the aggregate of notions, memories, clinging to the aggregate of mental constructions, and clinging to the aggregate of consciousness or sense awareness. With your response that you do not reflect nor look upon any of these as yourself, nor see them as parts or making up or belonging to a self in you, then does that mean that the Venerable Khemaka has attained the highest goal of the holy life, having destroyed all the contaminants by attaining arahantship? This is the, at least in those days, the $1 billion question, not to trivialize it, but it's like the secret question that would linger in the minds of meditating bhikkhus. Have you done it yet? Is that what this means? Have you reached it? I would see this also on retreats among lay people, and also some monastics I've come across where even though people are not supposed to talk, whenever they get a chance, like, to sit in the dining hall or something, there's that look with a big question mark. Did you get it? Did you reach it? At least the Sotapanna or the first jhana, whatever it is. So that is the sense that we can get from this question. And it's a genuine, it's not in any way, trivial, of course. But they're curious to know, has he done it? And the Venerable Dasaka eagerly went back to the Venerable Khemaka as he conveyed the elder bhikkhu's message by asking, friend, the Blessed One has taught us about the 5 aggregates of clinging that are comprised of clinging to the aggregate of form, clinging to the aggregate of feelings, clinging to the aggregate of notions or memories, clinging to the aggregate of mental constructions, and clinging to the aggregate of consciousness or sense awareness. With your response that you do not reflect nor look upon any of these as yourself, nor see them as parts or making up or belonging to a self in you, then does that mean that the Venerable Khemaka has attained the highest goal of the holy life, having utterly destroyed all the contaminants by attaining arahantship? At this, the Venerable Khemaka replied, the Blessed One has indeed taught us about the 5 aggregates of clinging that are comprised of clinging to the aggregate of form, clinging to the aggregate of feelings, clinging to the aggregate of notions or memories, clinging to the aggregate of mental constructions or sankharas, and clinging to the aggregate of consciousness or sense awareness. But I do not reflect nor look upon any of these as myself, nor see them as parts or making up or belonging to a self in me. Yet I am not an arahant, one whose contaminants have been utterly destroyed. For when speaking of the 5 aggregates, I am still not rid of the conceit I am, even though I don't find within me anything or anyone to be called or experienced as an I am. At this level, when a person says this, basically the world keeps knocking on the door, but there's no one to answer. That's one of the signs of a Sotapanna. The Salāyatanavagga are always bringing in data, but they don't have a footing, in a sense. And it's not like it's completely gone. Sometimes I've seen commentators or teachers talk about once the person reaches a Sotapanna, then completely the self idea, even the usage of the word self, myself, etc., is eradicated. But that is not true. Looking at the suttas, including the Buddha, he uses the word myself often. It is the identification with that. It's the crystallization of that sense of selfhood that is destroyed. Even if the person tries so hard to kind of hang a frame on this wall, but there's no nail to hang on. This is me, this is who I am. But for someone who has not yet experienced it, the way it sounds like with at least some of these bhikkhus who are questioning Venerable Khemaka, it can be very confusing to wrap their mind around. So, and the Venerable Dasaka, by having gone back to the elder bhikkhus, reported to them the Venerable Khemaka's response by saying, "The Blessed One has indeed taught us about the 5 aggregates of clinging that are comprised of clinging to the aggregate of form, clinging to the aggregate of feelings, clinging to the aggregate of notions or memories, clinging to the aggregate of mental constructions, and clinging to the aggregate of consciousness or sense awareness. But I do not reflect nor look upon any of these as myself, nor see them as parts or making up or belonging to a self in me. Yet I am not an arahant, one whose contaminants have been utterly destroyed. For when speaking of the 5 aggregates, I am still not rid of the conceit I am, even though I don't find within me anything or anyone to be called or experienced as an I am." Again, the elder bhikkhus asked the Venerable Dasaka if he could go back to the Jujube forest. I'm still, I'm hoping that it's a different day and not having the poor bhikkhu go back and forth 14 miles with each question, each trip, and carry this message as they further inquired from the Venerable Khemaka. "Friend Khemaka," the elder bhikkhus ask, "if friend Khemaka is not an arahant, then what can the Venerable Khemaka be referring to when he uses the term I am?" A very simple, it's a decent question. Is it in reference to form, matter, namarupa basically, or to feelings, or to memories or notions, or to mental constructions, or to vijnana, consciousness or sense awareness? Or is it something completely apart from them, from the 5 aggregates? What exactly is this I am that the Venerable Khemaka is referring to? This is where it's getting interesting. Having agreed to carry their message back, the Venerable Dasaka agreed to carry the message back, yet again went to the Venerable Khemaka and told him, "Friend, the elder monks would like to ask you this further question. Friend Khemaka, if friend Khemaka is not an arahant, then what can the Venerable Khemaka be referring to when he uses the term I am? Is it in reference to form or matter, or to feelings, or to memories, notions, or to mental constructions, or to consciousness or sense awareness? Or is it something completely apart from them? What exactly is this I am that the Venerable Khemaka is referring to?" Now, if you or I, if we were in Venerable Khemaka's position, we would pretty much do what he's going to do next. He's seeing Venerable Dasaka go back and forth with these questions. He just goes. At that point, the Venerable Khemaka exclaimed to the Venerable Dasaka, "Enough of this going back and forth, friend Dasaka. Please go, get me a walking stick, something I can lean onto, and I will go to the elder bhikkhus and carry my reply to them." So then the Venerable Khemaka, by leaning on a walking staff, walked all the way to the elder bhikkhus in Kosambi, 7 miles, especially for an ailing elder person, a bhikkhu. And after exchanging friendly greetings with them, sat to one side. Then the elder bhikkhus turned to the Venerable Khemaka, now seated among them, and said, "Friend Khemaka, when you say this term, I am, what exactly do you mean? Is it in regard to the form, to feelings, to notions, memories, to mental constructions, or to consciousness, sense awareness? Or is it something entirely different or separate from these? What is this I am that you still refer to?" "Friends," this is Venerable Khemaka responding, I do not say that I am this form, nor do I say that I am entirely separate from this form. I do not say that I am feelings, nor do I say that I am entirely separate from feelings. I do not say that I am notions or memories, nor do I say that I am entirely separate from notions or memories. I do not say that I am mental constructions, sankharas, nor do I say that I am entirely separate from mental constructions. I do not say that I am consciousness or sense awareness, nor do I say that I am entirely separate from consciousness or sense awareness. In other words, although I use the term I am in reference to the five aggregates that hold things together, that does not mean, however, that I recognize them as I am this, for I am still not rid of the conceit I am. The five aggregates are there. They function. But because of Venerable Khemaka declaring that he is not an arahant, he's also saying something else. That he's not an arahant, but he still has the conceit. Conceit happens to be one of the upper five fetters, sangyojanas. So we kind of are seeing that, okay, he might be an agami, a non-returner. So let's dig in some more. He uses here an analogy. And as Lord Buddha says, the terms that the phrasing that he uses is when he's demonstrating a point that's kind of terse and difficult to grasp at first. He says, for some wise people are able to grasp the meaning through the use of similes, metaphors, analogies. So here is Venerable Khemaka's version. Friends, it is very much like the fragrance of a blue, a white, or a red lotus. If someone were to tell you that the fragrance of a blue, a white, or a red lotus was in its petals, or in its color, or in its stem, would you consider that to be accurate? No, friend, that would not be accurate, replied the elder bhikkhus. What then, friends, would be an accurate way to describe as to where the fragrance of the lotus to be emanating from? Friend, it would be accurate to say that the fragrance of the lotus comes from the flower itself, replied the elder bhikkhus. Exactly, friends. In the same manner, I do not say that I am this form, nor do I say that I am entirely separate from this form. I do not say that I am feelings, nor do I say that I am entirely separate from feelings. I do not say that I am notions or memories or perceptions, nor do I say that I am entirely separate from notions or memories. I do not say that I am mental constructions, nor do I say I am entirely separate from mental constructions. I do not say that I am consciousness or sense awareness, nor do I say that I am entirely separate from consciousness or sense awareness. In other words, although I use the term I am in reference to the five aggregates holding things together, that does not mean, however, that I recognize them as I am this, for I am still not rid of the conceit I am. Friends, although a noble disciple may have abandoned the five lower fetters that bind a person to the sensual world, there still remains some residue in the form of the conceit I am, the desire that is I am, and the latent tendency of I am that lingers as the result of not having been uprooted yet. Here we have our answer as to where he is at on the path. He declared it in an indirect way. actually, in many ways. And he continues. Sometime later, however, as the noble disciple continues to observe the arising and vanishing of the five aggregates of clinging, he begins to see more and more clearly. This is the arising of the form or matter, namarupa. This is the vanishing of namarupa. This is the vanishing of form. This is the arising of feelings. This is the vanishing of feelings. This is the arising of notions or memories. This is the vanishing of notions or memories. This is the arising of mental constructions. This is the vanishing of mental constructions. This is the arising of consciousness or sense awareness. This is the vanishing of consciousness or sense awareness. Remember earlier I was mentioning before the sutta how impermanent things must be let go of. The noble disciple is watching, observing carefully with sati, constantly, seeing these five aggregates arise and vanish. And whatever arises and vanishes, we keep our hands off, as it were. And Venerable Khemaka resumes his instruction here. And as he continues, the noble disciple continues attending to the rise and fall of these five aggregates of clinging, thus, then the conceit I am, or the desire that is I am, and the latent tendency of I am all become uprooted. Friends, it is very much like the stained, dirty piece of cloth that is given to the washer to clean. And the washer would brush it with salt, lime, or cow dung and rinses it thoroughly in pure water. If you've ever been to India or a country like that, in some of the villages, and you will see places where they collect cow dung fresh and then they turn it into like a patty and flatten it, and then they dry it. It's used for several things, including mosquito repellent, for fire, and also for cleaning clothes. So that's why it's here. But, he continues, as the washer returns the cloth to its owner, clean and pure, the cloth would now still have with it the lingering smells of salt, lime, or cow dung, as these would not be removed from it while being washed. But when the owner puts it in a perfumed box, then the smells of salt, lime, or cow dung that were there earlier would now be completely removed. And in India, they would have boxes. It's like almost like, you know, in a refrigerator, we have to keep food from going bad. And in India, for example, they would have boxes. It doesn't have to be a big one. And they would have different fragrances there, like incense and things. And sometimes dirty clothes or things that would be, you know, that wouldn't smell right, and you still needed to wear it, and you didn't have time to go ahead and wash it and wait for a few days for it to dry, you would just throw it in there. So you would just gain a few hours of it not smelling, at least. So that's the pure perfumed box that is being referred to. You see this analogy of a perfumed box in different suttas, by the way, also. So, Venerable Khemaka continues. In the same way, friends, although a noble disciple may have abandoned the five lower fetters that bind a person to the sensual world, there still remains some residue in the form of the conceit I am, the desire that is I am, and the latent tendency of I am that lingers, as a result of not having been uprooted yet. Sometime later, however, as the noble disciple continues to observe the arising and vanishing of the five aggregates of clinging, he begins to see more and more clearly. This is the arising of form or matter. This is the vanishing of form or matter. This is the arising of feelings. This is the vanishing of feelings. This is the arising of notions or memories. This is the vanishing of notions or memories. This is the arising of mental constructions. This is the vanishing of mental constructions. This is the arising of consciousness or sense awareness. This is the vanishing of consciousness or sense awareness. And as he continues attending to the rise and fall of these 5 aggregates of clinging, thus, the conceit, I am, the desire that is, I am, and the latent tendency of I am, all become uprooted. When this was said, the elder bhikkhus said to the Venerable Khemaka, in asking our questions thus, surely we had no intentions of troubling the Venerable Khemaka. Our hope was that the Venerable Khemaka, in answering these questions, he would teach us, clarify, and elaborate for us, revealing, elucidating, and establishing us in the Dhamma by making us understand and see the dispensation of the Blessed One in detail. Whenever we come across the phrase establishing us in the Dhamma, that means establishing one in right view. That is, having crossed the path, gone beyond the point of no return in the Dhamma. That means, at the very least, becoming a Sotapanna, even a Magga or path level. So that was their hope, to be established in the Dhamma. And truly, they continue, and truly, the Venerable Khemaka has taught us, clarified and elaborated for us, having revealed, elucidated, as well as established us in the Dhamma, by making us understand and see the dispensation of the Blessed One in detail. This is how the Venerable Khemaka responded to the elder bhikkhus' questions. And the elder bhikkhus were all delighted in the words of the Venerable Khemaka. And while this exposition was taking place, the minds of about 60 elder bhikkhus were utterly liberated from the contaminants, together with the mind of the Venerable Khemaka. They became arahants, along with Venerable Khemaka. That is the power of the Dhamma. In fact, not just the Dhamma, we have to clarify. Listening to the Dhamma. Listening to the Dhamma. Attaining the first level of nobility, meaning becoming a Sotapanna, has a lot, if not everything, to do with listening with one's heart, with confidence and faith to the Dhamma, to the suttas, to reading the suttas, or listening to the suttas, or to a Dhamma talk, which necessitates the person's involvement, diligent effort in sitting, but not sitting with one's own conceptions and perceptions and interpretations of what this should be meaning, or this does not match with my own understanding of this or that. We leave all that outside and just be present to hear the Dhamma with our hearts. And the ones who do sit like that, the ones who listen with their hearts without having all these filters, to this day, people attain Sotapanna through listening to the Dhamma being talked about, being expressed, being elucidated, explained. So this sutta, Khemaka Sutta, is a wonderful sutta. It's the number I might have not mentioned it earlier. It's Khemaka Sutta, from the Samyutta Nikāya, number 22.89. It's in the section of the Thera Vaggas, or the senior bhikkhus of the Samyutta Nikāya. At this point, I will pause and ask for any thoughts, questions, comments. Again, because of the view of here on Zoom, I will not see hands. So please, if you have something to speak about or share, you can just, turn your mic on and jump in.
Bhante, thank you for your talk today.
Yes.
While 60 of the monks became arahants, unfortunately, I didn't change today, so I still have to keep working. The interesting thing that came up for me was the discussed on multiple times when observing the 5 aggregates of clinging, and they're talking about the mental components and the physical component arising and vanishing, and I can see relatively clearly the mental components arising and vanishing, and how, because they can happen in a relatively short amount of time. But when I'm looking at rupa, whilst I can clearly see that rupa is impermanent, it pretty much sits there and doesn't change. That would be me, that would be the bookshelf in front of me, the computer, all of those things are not changing. So can you just clarify for me a little bit, when we're observing the aggregates arising and vanishing, what is it I'm looking for rupa that might be changing, or is there something I'm just observing that impermanence, even though I'm actually not observing any change? I'm just not clear on how they can observe rupa arising and vanishing when I don't.
Usually, when we read the term or come across the term impermanence or anicca, and the more we hear it, the more we read it, it becomes almost like a wall in your house that becomes, it's there. I see it, I accept it, fine. It loses its significance, it loses its depth. But with the addition of observation, looking carefully, we see that it is the unreliability of things that the Buddha is referring to, the inconsistency of things, the instability of things, the non-fixed state of things. Now, it's also interesting how out of the 5 aggregates, the first 2, Namarupa and Vedana, usually are harder to detect, especially in this example, in your question, the Namarupa part, the form, the material form part, which is in the case of the body, things that we can relate to, see, touch, etc., versus sanya, sankhara, vijnana. Now, in your question, you say, I can see the others. But from the suttas, the teachings, we see how the last ones, the ones you just mentioned that you're able to see, are the ones that are so quick in coming and going away, showing up and then vanishing so fast. In fact, a second, a millisecond might be like a very long time to encapsulate them, because so many of them are occurring. However, the human mind has more of a relationship, if you will, in seeing these things like concepts. Well, I've always wondered about that. Like, how can, like, I'm concepts or consciousness, right? Comes and goes, comes and goes, comes and goes. But just picking up on sanya, we see how much we have dwelled and made up a life based on concepts. So there's more of a relationship with it than with the body, even though we spend so much time taking care of the body. We communicate with each other. You live life with the body in the observable reality that we call the world. But we neglect to consider that the body is the most abundant, the abundantly clear, that is, of all the five khandhas that demonstrates anicca, dukkha, anatta. Now, dukkha becomes obviously more emphasized because we've been sitting here for some time and the body is aching. Parts of the body go numb. It becomes uncomfortable. There you go. The body is speaking to us, saying, hey, move me, change my position. So the body has become very much like that. Reload. Okay. Can you see me? Yes. Okay. I don't know. It just Zoom just quit and then restarted. Apologies for that technical problem. But the body, therefore, is like that thing, that piece of furniture that we know it's there. We'll take care of it. We'll sweep. We'll wipe the dust off of it. Every once in a while, we can paint it, not to show the erosion, but it is eroding. Everything is changing. Everything is eroding. The Greg that we are communicating with today, we see, is different than the Greg that was 10 years old, or who lived in Australia, or who was doing something else an hour ago or 2 hours ago. Now, this becomes very conceptual, of course, easily. Coming back to the immediacy of seeing the arising and vanishing of the body. One suggestion would be to take an image of a video of still life. You know, you put a camera outside and you're taking a picture of a flower. Not a picture, I'm sorry, a video. You're recording a video of a flower. And for all intents and purposes, let's say there's no wind, and it's not moving for us to capture it. So it's almost like a time-lapse photography. You take that, and then after you're watching the video, it's recorded and you're watching it on display, and then you squeeze, instead of it being 5 or 6 hours, now you squeeze it into a shorter timeline. Suddenly you're going to see the flower being jittery, jittery, jittery. Now, in order for us to become more aware of anicca, or the arising and vanishing of the body, the sati has to become stronger. It must match, in a sense, that image of squeezing the timeline together, so we're able to not miss out the tiniest changes. Now, obviously, this is one way. Another one would be, like yesterday, I was sitting reading some text, and I looked at my hand, and it was starting to itch. So I wanted to scratch it. It wasn't there a millisecond ago. Now it's there. And I looked, and there was no insect, nothing walking on it, but it felt like it was. And I'm observing also the vein, the arteries that were there under the skin, and I noticed how they were pulsating. There's another demonstration of arising and vanishing. Just like feelings come up. Oh my God, I'm feeling so great, this and that, and then something else happens. All of a sudden, it's gone. But we never actually follow the stream and see, okay, what's happening now? Instead, we like to pitch our tent and stay there in that now past moment of experiencing that Vedana, that feeling. So now we're in the territory of sanya, We're no longer with Vedana. We're in Sanya. And we don't stop there either, because that memory turns into multiple associations. Now we are in the territory of sankharas, because now we're constructing things. We're building things. The Buddha had a wonderful term for it. He called it papanchas, mental proliferation. So we have now become divorced, disconnected, cut ourselves loose from reality, from the body, from feelings, from even memory, because it's no longer the memory. The memory did its thing, it triggered it, and now we are in the la-la land of mental constructions. But this is happening on an ongoing basis. So therefore, when we look at the importance given to sati and panya, then we start to understand that this has everything to do with awakening, with the experience of awakening. And so much energy, diligent effort is required by sati. So much, not to miss out a point. After all, if it weren't that important, sati, the Buddha would not put it in almost every formula, whether it's the Bojjhangas, the 7 factors of awakening, whether it's the Eightfold Path, the 5 spiritual faculties, the 5 powers, etc., etc. It's everywhere. So it's like I've used the example in the past of the car having those headlights and it's pitch blackness outside. Sati is those lights that clarify things for us. So I would use the physical sense to give you something a little bit more concrete, perhaps, a tool to connect you with the body's arising and fall. Observe. So we make the mistake of resembling the arising and vanishing speed of it, that is, with the speed with which sankharas come and go, or vijnanas come and go, or sanya comes and goes, perceptions. For the body, it's temporally a little bit longer. So that's how I would approach it. That's why I was referring to that example of a flower being videotaped, and then you squeeze it so that you can see. Squeeze it, meaning it's shortening the time, squeezing it together. The tiniest nuances now we are able to detect. So, but the body, for example, again, using the example of sitting long, the muscles that felt so comfortable, the joints that were feeling amazing when you first sat, it's not so after a certain time has passed. You know, right now, my right ankle, right foot is completely numb. So it's like, but it wasn't like that earlier. So I have to change the position. And then once you change the position, where's that numbness that was apparently so loud, it was inescapable. It was dominating my sphere of awareness, if you will. The sense awareness was that. Helped me change my position immediately. And then you change, boom, all that intensity is gone. Arising, vanishing. That's one way of observing the body, or nama, or in this case, rupa, the form, arise and fall.
So I agree with your analogy about the time lapse. Obviously, using that in the past, I have been able to think about everything, even mountain ranges, eventually all decay and disappear. And so impermanence is quite clear. But when I use that, when I look at, as you said, feeling and sanya perception, all the things in mental components are arising and passing much more quickly relative to rupa. I feel that, and I may be wrong because I haven't thought it all the way through, is that I can look at sanya and see it separately from feeling, from Vedana. I can observe Vedana separately without having to use memories to do that. But when I use even the time-lapse analogy, and I am more aware of the arising and vanishing of rupa, I can only do that using perception. I have to use memory to recall what it used to be like, and maybe even project what it might be like. I guess I don't have to project, I can only use memory, but I have to use memory recall a number of instances and observe that change. And so I'm wondering whether I should be able to observe that change in rupa separately without using memory. But from what you said, really it's a requirement to use memory to observe.
Not necessarily, because using the example of the foot going numb or the body part, you change your position. You're feeling it. It doesn't require memory per se. Your body is giving you plenty of input to know that it is in pain, it is in discomfort. Now, mindfulness, we need to distinguish between mindfulness and memory. Mindfulness is the thing that is allowing the object to be known. In this case, the object is the aggregate, sanya. Sanya is an object. It is there to be known because it is impermanent. Now, using the body separate from sanya, what we're doing is we're observing the physical sensations of the body as they take place. That's why it is present. It is jnana dassana, seeing things how they come to be in the present moment. There is no involvement with the past, in the sense. The body is trying to help us stay or drive us to stay in the past and compare. This is where conceit comes in. Another form of definition of conceit is compare and contrast. So before I was better, now I'm not. When we dwell into that territory, then yes, absolutely, sanya is being brought in to be added into the equation. Whereas if we just look at the aggregate of form, meaning the physical sensation, in this example, the kayanupassana, practicing, just constantly staying with the body. What happens is, once you fix the body, the numbness, if you're staying with the body, with the sensation, there's no need or requirement for us to incorporate sanya into the equation, because your body is telling you right now what is taking place. In that sense, with the purity and the development, refinement of sati, you are in fact seeing the arising of form and the vanishing of form. Arising of form, vanishing of form. Form in this case, if you noticed, I'm using it as physical sensation. Is this working for you?
I think one of the challenges I was having was using external objects like the bookshelf or the walls, where what you were saying with the feeling wouldn't help. So, and I can understand when I'm being mindful, I guess I'm not really being mindful of the bookshelf because I can't feel its sensations and etc. So if I limit my mindfulness to myself, the 5 aggregates, then everything you're saying works. So am I being incorrect when I think about form, thinking about the walls and the bookshelf? Should I not do that? And the mindfulness part, just keep it to 5 aggregates.
The Buddha says, you can't see the rest of my arms, but everything is in this fathom-long body.
Okay.
Dhamma, the world, he says, loka, the whole entire cosmos, the existence is all in this 1 fathom-long body. The Dhamma is here. Samsara is here. The kileshas are here. The way to understand and penetrate through and reach Nibbana is here, nowhere else. Because you're risking so much when you're leaning into the world around you. I think it was last week, I mentioned about those 3 bhikkhus who had gone into their rains retreat. And it's a very, very small monastery with 3 kutis and a small Dhamma hall. And they make a vow to one another. They say, throughout this rains retreat, which is 3 months, let us control our mindfulness, not allowing it to be dissipated, if you would, go far. So, and they're practicing, and they're not bringing this up throughout the 3 months. So they need to exchange or notes, basically, once the rains retreat is over. So it's over. So they come, and the senior bhikkhu, the abbot, calls them over and says, so tell us, he refers to the youngest bhikkhu and says, how was your sati maintenance? He says, Bhante, I stayed with my mindfulness, and I did not allow it to leave the confines, the borders of the monastery. It didn't leave. It didn't go to the village. It didn't go to see who's building what's happening in the world, who's getting married to whom, etc., etc. If there's a war, what's happening in the world? Is there COVID, no COVID? All these things. It's the world. He says, very good. But his mind was all over the place as far as the monastery went, despite it being small. So he might have been reconstructing his kuti, thinking about, oh, my room is cleaner than the other bhikkhus. How come they don't sweep their floor, their ground like I do? How come their slippers are not next to each other every time they go inside, etc.? All these things. Again, he made the resolution not to leave the monastery grounds. This is fine. And he asked the other bhikkhu, and the other one says, Bhante, I made sure my sati did not leave my room. It stayed inside the borders of my room, the walls. It didn't leave. Even when I was outside, it was just in this vicinity. But because he was spending most of in a rains retreat, bhikkhus are strongly advised to practice in isolation and seclusion. So staying within their kuti would be the thing. So he says that's where it was. But you can still do a lot with distraction when you're inside the room, redecorating the room, rearranging the furniture, the stool that you might have, the bed, etc. And then these 2 monks turn to the elder monk and they say, Bhante, how about you? How was your sati? And he says, oh, I actually made the resolution and stayed with my body. I did not allow it to leave even an inch away from my body, to go even that far. Because there's nothing more immediate than your body to demonstrate the 3 characteristics of existence, anicca, dukkha, anatta, because it can easily, depending on the type of dispositions we have, and in this time period, we're very heady. We can conceptualize easy, and we can put Dhamma as a book in a shelf somewhere, including these concepts, and we can perpetuate these concepts and add them to our repertoire, but it's completely disconnected from the body and the living experience of the body. That's why the Buddha realized this 26 centuries ago. And every time he used the body, you would see results. When Venerable Anuruddha was asked as to how he attained arahantship, his insistence was he practiced the satipatthana everywhere he went. With what? With the body. In the Anguttara Nikāya, you have chunks and chunks of suttas that talk about experiencing the deathless, which is Nibbana, through the body. The Buddha so many times says, anyone who disregards the importance of directing the mind, the mindfulness to the body, doesn't know what they're talking about. In fact, they're not even practicing the Dhamma, he says. That is adhamma, he calls it, non-Dhamma. I mean, we came with this, we're going to go with this. I mean, we're going to drop this. That's what I mean. That's it. This is the only companion we have, truly. And we have a front row seat to all the principles covered in the Dhamma, starting with the anicca, dukkha, anatta, right here through this window. Unfortunately, though, it's not pleasurable to stay with the body, especially if the feelings of discomfort are there being experienced, or the present moment that the body is registering. We run away, try to hide from the tension in the heart, in the body, in the neck, in the head, by going and seeking out new experiences outside in the world. So no, we cannot be mindful of the world when we're neglecting the body. It's the other way around. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. It cleared up an important point. I'm sure it was an important point for me, so it made a big difference, and I'm so glad for your answer. Thank you.
Wonderful. Beautiful question. Other comments, questions? Please go ahead and start speaking. Can't see. Somebody's mic is on, so I guess someone is trying to speak. How about this then? If no one's speaking or commenting, how about, sorry, Russell, did you have something to say?
No, but my question is a kind of superficial. Since you are talking about a lot of senior bhikkhu, and some of them their health is not good, I was curious in Buddha's time, what their view toward medicine or health and medicine was, and how did they utilize whatever was present at the time to try to help the body or rescue the body, or did they just feel it's a kind of a natural organic process and just go with the flow? Mm-hmm. I mean, it is it's not exactly related to your theme, but I was just curious because they have a hard life, and of course people do get older or get sick, or so I was just curious what the attitude toward say medicine or saving the body or not, or
yes,
what that was about.
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily. Yeah, sure. I wouldn't necessarily call it a superficial or not as important of a question, because it is very important. We're all going to age if we're lucky enough, I guess. I don't even know if it's a lucky thing. It's an old habitual thing that I was raised using, I guess, phraseology. Anyhow, coming back to your question. Today, you have health experts trying to incorporate dieting systems or methodologies that are directly derived from the lifestyle of a bhikkhu. Meaning, there's one I came across the other day, actually. It's called the monk's diet, where you go and fasting, and this is in reference to fasting, and obviously direct connection to the body. When you're coming across a culture where since childhood I've been taught to eat, there's a three phases of food during the day, breakfast, lunch, dinner. So that is a paradigm that still many of us struggle to let go of. But it's a completely unhealthy way of doing it, generally speaking. Again, disclaimer, I'm not a medical doctor or a dietitian, although I've studied, nutrition and all of that extensively. But the Buddha saw the relevancy of food in not only the health of the body, but also the health of the mind. For example, on retreats, if you've ever been on one, a long extended retreat, anything like around 8 days or 10 days, if it is done right, there should not be food offered in the evening. Now, what many people do is they start loading up during breakfast and lunch. Well, that defeats the whole purpose of eating one meal a day now, doesn't it? I once was with a monastic, and he was one who would claim that he's a one meal a day bhikkhu. And we were being offered food by supporters, and the menu came, so he was given the option of ordering food, and he ordered steak with the whole shebang. And then he went with his fingers like this. Make that two. 2 plates of full-on steak, big T-bone steak. And I don't know how he placed it in his body, but he did nicely. Now, this is not what the Buddha had in mind when he's talking about one meal a day. It's a one meal a day. Use the common sense, folks. So these bhikkhus, however, especially because of the connection, the closeness of time, they're living at the time of the sasana when it's still so rich and full, and Lord Buddha is around at that time. You would have about a distance of about a kilometer from yourself to the village. In fact, that's one of the criteria where, unless the bhikkhu decides to go off and really go on a longer fast, and they're able to do it, and their teachers are okay with this, they will go off and live on a mountain and just fast. So it's a very strong resolution. That is not the general instruction. Initially, there were more meals allowed, but the Buddha saw that many people were going to the village to get more food instead of sitting down and meditating. We don't become bhikkhus or ascetic monastics to gain more food and access. The food is there just to sustain the 4 great elements in the body, to sustain the effort, because you cannot be diligent in your sati without food. That's another reason why when we sit to eat, we have to pause for at least a millisecond to observe whether there is the presence of attachment to the food, especially if it's something that we've always enjoyed eating, that type of food. Now, coming back directly to the health part of the question, the 1 kilometer distance, the person has to walk early in the morning to the village, go on alms round, and then come back and sit somewhere, either on the road, under a tree, or back to the monastery if it's still before noon. That's your exercise right there. Now, unfortunately, more and more monastics are not able to do that for various reasons, especially with the COVID thing, where they would go to Pindapada or the alms round. But we still would have the instruction by the Buddha to do the walking meditation, which is not just like 1 hour a day or 15 minutes. They need to match up with each other, the sitting meditation with the walking meditation. So if you're a bhikkhu and sitting, let's say, for about 4 hours a day, your walking meditation needs to be at least 4 hours. At least. So talk about exercise. We're going past beyond the 10,000 step a day thing, with the step counters. Now, as far as medicine goes, one of the things that used to be prescribed, and I think it still is used in parts of India, as part of the requisites is the medicine that we have, the 4 requisites. So we need to have medicinal resources being offered to us. And in those days, because it's very meager, the means of which the supporters would help the bhikkhu in medicine. It would be very like homeopathic, very naturalistic. So when I came across this back in the 90s, I was like disgusted of what it is. It's basically fermented cow urine. They would take the urine, they would dehydrate it actually under the sun, and they would boil it and things like that. And then it would turn eventually to a paste. So they would use this in pretty much everything. As an ointment, things like that. And there might be some bhikkhus who are still holding on to this old tradition in far off forests, maybe. But that doesn't mean that that was the only medicine. Of course, some supporters would jump in and say, Bhante, I'm going to take care of you. It's the medicinal requisites and the requirements as the fourth requisite. So, however, including like hospital beds, things like that, those would be very much included. Perhaps even the first hospital idea of having like in a community monastic setting where there would be like a place for the wounded or the elderly to go to. You have that in Savatthi. So it was very much like avant-garde, the monastic system when it came to the health. And 2,600 years later, modern science, nutrition is up in arms, just like amazed at the health values of the Buddhist monk diet. That says a lot. Unfortunately, that is changing because you do have today obese, not just overweight, obese bhikkhus and bhikkhunis. So.
No, thank you. It's very helpful.
I'm glad. Any other thoughts, questions?
Yes, I have. I have a question, a related question on health.
Mm-hmm.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Okay, I have a related question on health, but in this case about mental health. I'm taking care of someone who is bipolar, but also suffer from anosognosia. So in other words, he does not recognize that he refused to acknowledge that he has any illness and refuse medication. But I feel I learn a lot from taking classes regarding the illness. And the most important thing is that one has to separate the illness from the individual. And it's very amazing to read about all the positive symptoms of people with mental illness, including behavior that are very obnoxious, such as feeling constantly tense or nervous, being irritable, critical, and abusive. So learning about the illness really allowed me to be very empathetic as opposed to being upset by the person who is ill, realizing that this is part of the illness. But at the same time, if you really care for that person, you also want to influence the behavior without lecturing. In other words, the last thing you should do is that, hey, you're being mean, you're being, how come you're not more like me? How come you just are so selfish? So the last thing one should do is to tell them that they are wrong or that they are, behaving improperly. So I want to ask you, how would you cope with, so for me, it's no problem for me to, and I'm glad to learn about the illness and to be able to love the person anew, knowing that it is part of the illness. But at the same time, is it okay to try to influence them, not by lecturing, but by example? Exactly. In other words, to let them be, but at the same time, I myself never worry. No matter what is happening, I can tell you that, okay, I just want to listen to you. I won't worry. But at the same time, continue to do things for other people so that he can see that, he's not the center of the world, that, and to care about myself, saying that, okay, you can come back at 3 o'clock at night, but please don't wake me up because sleep is important to me, as opposed to saying that, hey, you must come back at a certain time, just to kind of be the example and protect myself. And whether you have any comments on how the Buddhist way would deal with someone who has a mental illness with anosognosia.
The Buddha actually, based on my research, this was startling, the wonderful one, actually, discovery, to find that 2,600 years ago, he was the first one who actually used the phrase physical illness and mental illness. Mental. Okay? So, in connection to what you were asking, so long as a person has not attained arahantship, they have a mental illness. That means you, that means me, not just the person you're referring to. Because the person you're referring to might have an exaggerated, an intense, a very saturated version of the symptoms that you and I share. You might say that you don't worry, but so long as you're not an arahant, I'm not going to believe you. Plain and simple. And please don't try to convince yourself otherwise. Because what will happen is when you're going to point the finger at someone else as having a serious mental illness or coming up with diagnoses, well, the APA sits there pretty much, they get paid this and that to come up with new diagnoses every few years. And the thickness of the DSM gets wider and thicker and thicker and thicker and thicker because they keep adding new diagnoses. And what you have today is many people are self-diagnosing, or even worse, diagnosing each other, while completely omitting the very huge fact to consider that they themselves have many of these symptoms, although perhaps on a milder scale. But it's there. So if you want to help someone else, first and foremost, you need to really work on your own mental illness. Plain and simple. And don't let anyone else to convince you otherwise, especially your own upbringing or your own concepts of yourself, of oneself. Because, oh, it happens over there, not here. No, I got my stuff together. No, I've read enough books and this and that. Many people who call themselves professionals or experts, in fact, can qualify for many of these diagnoses. Many therapists don't go and see a therapist. What do you say to that? But their schedules are full of people that they're seeing and providing so-called therapy to. What does that say? That means the person is completely neglecting to work on themselves. Talk about working by example. Now, we can't just say this and walk, just pass by it and just, everyone has to work on their own mental health. Yes, we get it. But as far as the Dhamma is concerned, so long as a person has not, at the very least, seen with the Dhamma eye, meaning established in the Dhamma, at the very least, Sotapanna stage, a stream enterer, where their faith is intact. There's no way that they could go with any other teaching. It's impossible. It's impossible that someone could come and convince you otherwise. At the very least, to get to that level, already you've cut yourself a big chunk of samsara and suffering for you. And therefore, you allowed yourself to relinquish a big portion of mental illness that you've been dragging with you. Now, of course, you still have mental illness, just like in the case of Venerable Khemaka. He wasn't just complaining about his physical ailments, he was talking about the fact that he still had conceit, which is a very, very, very subtle, but very present. Just like, I'm not sick, don't get me wrong, I'm not sick. He is sick. He is the one who needs help. Guess who's talking? Conceit, plain and simple. It's nicely camouflaged, with things like experience, age, knowledge, terminology, etc., or even a fake smile. We do that often. We try to fake ourselves out of it by pointing the attention at someone else. Many of these helpers that you see in history or in different places who want to help, that's a wonderful thing, by the way, of course. But when you have them on candid camera and they're following, the camera follows them into their own world, you see, oh my, they're the first who needs help. But another way of addressing that, meaning by running away from it, is by helping someone else, which gives us the sense of self-satisfaction that, yeah, see, I'm helping. See how good I am? See how great I am? See how I have my stuff together? Meanwhile, it's just a ruse. It's just a big fat lie. Because deep down, we're very, very much hurting. And that's another reason when people go off to retreats or to live by themselves, even for a little while, they don't know what to do, especially if they're away from such individuals where they were taken care of for so long. Suddenly there's this vacuum. What am I going to do? You're faced with your own hindrances, your own defilements, and there's not going to be running away from them because you're by yourself. You can't stick them on someone else. So it's an opportunity for growth for the individual. Even if you're in the room with a narcissist who also is someone who's like, I have nothing wrong with me, it's the world that's got the problem mentality. And you have a lot of that today in society. Narcissism, it's not just in one or two people. And as far as the need for mental health, I think everyone needs mental health, addressing of mental health, and so long as they're not arahants. So we all need, I think, to cater, take care of that. So I hope that is a sufficient response to you. I think we're good with time, right? Unless there's an urgent question that needs to be asked. Okay, so let us dedicate some merit. May suffering ones be suffering free, and the fear-struck fearless be. May the grieving shed all grief, and may all beings find health relief. May all beings share in these merits that we have thus acquired for the achievement of all kinds of wholesome happiness. May beings inhabiting space and earth, devas and nagas of mighty power share in these merits of ours. May they long protect the Buddha's dispensation. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Please strive on diligently. No one will do the work for us. It's all about you. It's all about you. It's all about the person inhabiting this bag of bones that we call a body. That's always changing. It's unreliable. It's inconstant. It is impermanent. Using that as our library of knowledge that always is feeding us with new information to relinquish our thoughts and explanations of the world. Being able to walk away from all that as we anchor ourselves in the reality of the present, living experience, irrespective of what's happening around us. And be like that elder bhikkhu, the abbot, who made his confines of his mindfulness his own body. I wish upon you that, in the highest Magga, Phala, and Nibbana. No one's going to give that to you, except for your own efforts. Be well. See you next week. Sukhī Hotu.